morning and welcome to another edition of Lifespan's Living Your Best Life webinar series. I hope today finds you well. My name is Stephen Matsey and I am Lifespan's Program and Outreach Coordinator and your host for today's event. In our ongoing effort to promote senior education, awareness, and wellness, we are very pleased to offer these quarterly webinars. Our presenters will be experts in their fields and bring information that is relevant to the aging community. So whether you're a senior, a loved one, an aging service provider, or community member, it is our hope that you find value in these presentations. Lifespan is a local Santa Cruz home care agency that has been providing geriatric care management, home care, and well-being services since 1983. We have a vision that everyone deserves to live their best life every day of their life. Today's webinar, Mental Health Challenges and Mindfulness Practices for Older Adults, will be presented by Dr. Leslie Tremaine and will run until about 12 p.m. This webinar is being recorded and a link will be provided to you after today's event. In addition, we will have a survey at the end of today's webinar that we encourage you to fill out so we can continue improving your webinar experience. As a reminder, your videos are turned off and your mics are muted. However, if you have a question during today's presentation, you can use the Q&A or chat function at the bottom of your Zoom screen. In addition, we will have time after today's presentation for additional Q&A. So we'll get to every question that we can. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce to you today's presenter, Dr. Leslie Tremaine. Leslie's multi-decade career has focused on leadership of public behavioral health systems at the state and county levels. She served as the Santa Cruz County Mental Health Director until retiring in 2012. Since then, she has continued the focus by teaching mindfulness classes, mentoring emerging leaders, and providing training on supporting well-being. In recent years, her focus has been on mental health in older adults, including offering groups at facilities such as Dominican Oaks, and for participants, staff members, family caregivers, through groups offered at local organizations. She also teaches mindfulness at Insight Santa Cruz. So please help me give Leslie a warm Santa Cruz or wherever you are at welcome to present today's information on mental health challenges and mindfulness practices for older adults. Dr. Tremaine, the floor is yours.
Welcome again, I add to Stephen's welcome. And in a sense, given the realities of Zoom, I'm saying welcome to you to my home. We talked about the possibility of putting up a fancy banner of some sort instead. And I said, no, I kind of like the idea that we're doing this with me right here visibly in my home. So to jump right in, the title of today's presentation about mental health challenges is important in that those challenges are absolutely real for every human being, certainly for older adults, and even more so in the midst of what we're experiencing with the pandemic and the other issues going on in our society. But I think I want to be sure that you understand that what I want to talk about today about mindfulness is not only a tool for dealing with the tough times, the challenges. I see it as a tool for enhancing our well-being and our health. It's a little bit like going to the gym, and the stronger we get, the better we're able to deal with the tough times. And also, we begin to actively enjoy that sense of being in our bodies as they strengthen. So today for me, mindfulness is certainly about dealing with challenges, but it doesn't involve waiting until the challenges come to use those practices and to develop those skills. In every single day of life, mindfulness can enhance our sense of well-being. My mindfulness of the absolutely glorious sunlight out there today enhanced my waking this morning and my experience of the morning. And then when I started getting nervous about this presentation, I could kind of go back and ground in that mindfulness to deal with that challenge, strengthened by having taken in the beautiful day. So understand that it's that both and perspective. There's a series of practices you may have heard about because they really began to bring mindfulness into our common everyday language for many of us. Mindfulness-based stress reduction. That's the work of Jon Kabat-Zinn, to give him his due credit. And my initial experiences with mindfulness were in that mode of mindfulness-based stress reduction. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But right now, where I am in my use and my teaching of mindfulness is encapsulated by what is the other end of my teaching day today, which is a group on mindfulness and awakening joy. So I want you to listen today from the perspective of these are tools that can help me with the tough times. And they're also tools that every single day can help me to cultivate that well-being, to awaken joy. And it's also important to me to recognize that in talking about challenges, mental health challenges, I'm not going to be talking about the deepest, most persistent, long-lasting kinds of mental illness. I will be talking today primarily about how mindfulness can be supportive in dealing with depression and anxiety, and focused on those two conditions, often interwoven together, because they really are the most relevant for the most of us in terms of what constitutes our most frequent emotional distress. It's not that mindfulness can't be helpful with other mental disorders, but it's certainly, to me today, most relevant in those terms. And I want to say that I have selected mindfulness as that tool for well-being, for dealing with challenges, both because I've had strong personal experiences of that value, but also because it's something we can do for ourselves. And that's not necessarily instead of seeking professional help. Let me be very clear that I'm not saying you do this mindfulness and you can forget your need for any kind of professional help. That may still be very relevant for you. But it can be very, very helpful for our well-being to have that sense of being able to do something ourselves that improves how we feel. That sense of what can be called self-agency. It lifts how we feel emotionally when we realize I don't have to be the passive victim of something. I can do something to make a difference myself. I have that capacity, not necessarily control. There's no question that conditions will change, that events will happen that we don't control from the outside. But what we do control to a much greater extent is how we respond. And mindfulness is in that category of tools we can use as part of a wise and skillful response. Being aware helps us to make a distinction between our chosen response and just reactivity, what we're in a groove to do, perhaps. So mindfulness has that sense of something we can choose to do for ourselves. It also does not have to be something woo-woo, fancy, I've got to become a monk or a monastic to do this. It can be very, very practical and integrated into our everyday life. So it's planting some seeds of hope and self-agency in our everyday gardens. Tools like mindfulness for dealing with anxiety, dealing with what we call depression. They are relevant right now in so many ways. I want to acknowledge, first of all, in a sense, it's part of my creds. It's also just some real honesty. These are conditions I've had personal experience with. So they're personally relevant for me in that I have felt the impact of depression and anxiety. They're also prevalent within our world right now at tremendously high levels. Even before the pandemic, we might have said we had an epidemic of depression and anxiety, just increasing rates of prevalence of both of these conditions. Now, in the time of the pandemic, I have to double check my statistics because every time I say this, I'm just stunned. Anxiety was a condition that was reported as being experienced prior to the pandemic by 1 out of 12 people. Today, anxiety is reported in most studies to be being experienced by 1 out of 3 people. That's a 4-fold increase in the prevalence of self-reported anxiety. It's not surprising in many ways, but I think it makes the topic today something really responsible that Lifespan has chosen to address, and something that is extremely, extremely relevant to what we're experiencing now. There's certainly the hope we can see from vaccines and all we hear about the potential for quote unquote herd immunity. We've got a ways to go. And as we deal with that, some tools for dealing with mental challenges, 1 out of 12 to 1 out of 3, the odds are pretty good. A significant number of us have been dealing more significantly with anxiety, and the statistics are not that different for depression. Now, these conditions are not limited in relevance to older adults and their caregivers, but they have a particular relevance for them. Older adults in general, again, prior to the pandemic, are particularly vulnerable to these states of emotional distress. That's completely understandable if you consider the losses that may be experienced, the situational factors involved in aging, perhaps physical disorders that limited someone's activities and ability. I shouldn't say someone's, have limited mine. And of course, the potential for isolation. Take that and just wind it up in the context of the pandemic. And any older adults, for example, living in retirement facilities or assisted living, they're dealing, number one, with basically reading about their living conditions and hearing about it in the news because of the risks. And they're dealing with greater and greater isolation. As Stephen mentioned, I used to absolutely love teaching over at Dominican Oaks. I can't go now. I miss that, but even more, it's indicative of the isolation that people at Dominican Oaks and so many places like that are experiencing. So anxiety and low mood, of course, they would affect the age group most likely to be living in facilities like that. So the incidence of mental challenges for older adults now is quite significant. And of course, their caregivers are caught in that also. The risks they may feel they're experiencing in health terms, the conditions they're seeing people in, the challenges to the overall workforce, which amp up how much individuals may have to take on as their work. So, of course, caregivers are directly and indirectly affected also. And so this becomes quite relevant for them also. I think the relevance also is great because culturally, we live in a world where we see aging somehow as putting someone in a different category. And we have cultural perspectives about aging that are kind of different in our country that can be somewhat more isolating. I've spent years living overseas in countries where older adults were revered as the sages and the sources of wisdom and were brought into the center of literally the fire circle, brought into the center of life as elders in the most positive sense. That isn't how we've generally structured things in our culture. And so there's that further stressor for people in the stigma, in a sense, the isolation in that stereotyping way of aging. And if you add to that, telling anyone you're experiencing depression or anxiety means in our culture all too frequently saying you're broken. So we start out with this kind of stigma about aging and about experiencing significant emotional distress, which just becomes a vicious cycle. So I'm probably not telling you anything you don't know about what makes this topic relevant, but I just want to acknowledge all of that as the context in which we're talking about mental health challenges and mindfulness and how to cultivate greater well-being amidst that climate. Now, why begin with mindfulness? Why use mindfulness as a tool to support ourselves and to cultivate mental health and well-being in this life stage? First of all, as I said earlier, this is a tool we can use ourselves. As I said, I certainly am not dismissing the importance of therapy, of using professionals, of all that is around us in terms of those options for care for depression and anxiety. And I think it's very important to recognize part of the answer is right here in me. I'm not broken in the sense that I can't help myself. And I think that's one of the real pluses for me about the use of a practice like mindfulness, is that it's something that enhances that sense of I may have a problem, but I'm also the source of the answer, the solution. And it doesn't take a lot of fancy training and time to begin to put that into play. So I've been talking a lot about mindfulness, let me tell you why it's where I've put so much of my attention and my time throughout my life. I think that it is a word that's being used so much now that it's important to begin with a basic understanding. First of all, I'm not talking about something that needs to be seen in some sort of religious or spiritual context. I honor and even teach within contexts that recognize the Buddhist use of what we call mindfulness. And yet it's something that's available, that's usable, and that is even involved in many other spiritual and contemplative backgrounds. That mindfulness is not something that means I got to go to a Buddhist sangha, as they're called, to practice. Mindfulness is defined, and I'll get my quote out here. One of the best known teachers of mindfulness is the Vietnamese Buddhist teacher Thich Nhat Hanh, and I love the way he describes it. Mindfulness is the energy that helps us recognize the conditions of happiness that are already present in our lives. That's not exactly the traditional definition of mindfulness. He says you don't have to wait 10 years to experience this happiness. It's present in every moment of your daily life. When you breathe in and you're aware of your in-breath, you touch the miracle of being alive. That's why mindfulness can be a source of happiness. I love that. He also says mindfulness is when you are truly there, mind and body together, which gets a little closer to the relatively well accepted kind of sciencey definitions of mindful. Paying attention to the present moment with openness, curiosity, and a willingness to be with what is. Just say that again. Paying attention to present moment experiences with openness, curiosity, and a willingness to be with what is. That is important in part because we don't do that a lot of the time. A great deal of the time, our minds, our attention, our awareness, wandering all over the place. I may be sitting listening to someone speak like me, and at the same time, I'm thinking about what I need to do to prepare for my class this evening. And I may be hearing a sound and wondering what my neighbor is doing. And did she get the note I gave her about all of this can take us away from the present moment. It's natural, it's human. Our brains are just like scattering to gather in as much as possible and have this tendency to jump ahead and to look back rather than to be with what is right now. So mindfulness is, in a sense, a counterbalance in that sense of paying attention to present moment experiences and being willing to be with what is. I was telling Stephen before we got started today that I was getting kind of anxious about doing this presentation. Pretty natural human reaction. And I found myself jumping ahead. What do I say about this? How do I do it? And the more I did that, the more anxious I got. when I stopped and just said, what does anxious feel like in my body? How's my breathing right now? Let's just come back to right now. I got back into what Thich Nhat Hanh talks about as mindfulness as a source of grounding and greater well-being. I didn't need to be jumping far ahead. I didn't need to be looking back and saying, gosh, why did I say yes to do this? Blah, 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 blah. I could just be with my present moment experiences. It helped me to get out of the habit groove of getting anxious about, would I make a good impression and what will people think? That sort of autopilot of what happens when we're going to be presenting ourselves. So mindfulness in that sense helped me to stop that vicious cycle, just reground, and being in that present moment, actually be better prepared to do what I'm doing now. I was only making that worse. And in a sense, having a sort of self-defeating quality to my behavior with that anxious ruminating that my years of training allowed me to recognize and stop in that moment. So that's kind of personal experience about the benefits of mindfulness in the face of various kinds of difficulties. There's also a tremendous amount of science. I'm going to review a little bit of that. I'm not going to get too geeky about it. But just for those of you for whom that kind of pragmatic and science base is important, I want to certainly make reference to that. And then we're going to take this more into the realm of experience and do some practices of mindfulness. So first of all, one of the scientists who's done some of the strongest research, Richie Davidson in Wisconsin, University of Wisconsin-Madison, did a study that showed that mindfulness training programs actually result in participants developing a stronger immune system. So right in the middle of the pandemic and all we're going through, mindfulness can not only help us with our mental challenges, but maybe help with the mental challenge of our anxiety about it all, because it helps enhance the health of our immune system. I kind of like that. And it actually results in growth in certain regions of the brain that help us to function more effectively and regulate emotional responses. I'll show you something kind of silly here. I didn't put it literally on the screen, but I'll put it up here for you. That's my brain under study by Richie Davidson himself in Wisconsin, because I have had a long-term practice. I was flown out there. I was treated kind of like a lab rat and put under all kinds of stress. Unbelievable things those folks did to me. While they also had my brain hooked up, and they watched how certain regions of my brain stayed relatively calm in spite of them showing me a bunch of violent pictures, or they locked me in an fMRI for like 3 hours and showed me violent films and had these images being produced. And my brain continued to function fairly calmly. Since we're talking about older adults, one other benefit that is important in the use of mindfulness is protecting against age-related DNA damage. Aging tends to wear down our kind of key parts like DNA. And in regular meditators, meditation apparently was protecting the cells from some of that age-related damage. And a series of studies, a whole raft of them, have shown that mindfulness is associated with overall improvements in mental health, reduce the rate of relapse of depression by more than 40%, comparable to the use of antidepressants in preventing relapse. So I think that that sense of the benefits of our immune system, a higher functioning areas of the brain being activated, protecting against DNA damage, and improving mental health. Also, I would mention improving coping with pain, which can be one of the things that gets us depressed, is dealing with chronic pain. So the stress of chronic pain is easier to deal with a mindfulness practice. But all of those benefits make this a tool that is something we can use ourselves. It's practical and relatively easy to learn, and it has results comparable to a lot of fancy medicine. So kind of like, why not? And as I said, it doesn't take a long time or a lot of practice in a given day. We don't have to turn ourselves into monks. We're going to learn some formal, brief practices today, and then some informal practices that can be woven into everyday life. So in switching gears now, I'd like you to just go ahead and wherever you're sitting now, so if you got things in your hands, put them down. I put my notebook down. And I'm not going to use my regular bells or anything, just signal the beginning and ending of what we're doing with my voice. But often, as you may know, bells are used. But I want to make this as much like everyday life as possible. So just making a shift to sitting in a way that allows us to feel both alert and at ease. And if we're comfortable doing so, we can signal a kind of shift in how we're using our time and our awareness by closing our eyes. It's not necessary, but we're so visually oriented that can help us to settle a bit, to close our eyes, or at least just look down kind of softly a few feet in front of us. And we don't have to sit on fancy cushions or in some formal posture. We can be sitting in a regular chair. But again, feeling a little bit of a lift in the spine and the shoulders that gives us some sense of alertness and yet also is comfortable and at ease. Our bodies are built for this balance. And as we turn our attention inward now, we can feel how a little bit of lift in the spine, a settling of the shoulders, a softening of the belly, a relaxing of the muscles in the face and the hands. All of this can help us arrive in this present moment. And with that settling, feeling where our bodies make contact with whatever surface we're sitting on. Maybe a soft chair, a hard chair, whatever, a sofa, whatever it may be. But just feeling wherever our bodies touch that surface. The hip bones, the buttocks, back of the thighs, probably the back of the knees. And then for most of us also, our feet making contact with the floor beneath us. These experiences of the backbone lifted upwards and the lower half of the body settled in a chair, floor. These are part of our regular experience much of the day. And yet, when we turn to pay special attention to them, we can realize they're pretty rich experiences, pretty complex experiences. There's a lot going on in the body. We can recognize also in that spirit that Thich Nhat Hanh spoke of, how miraculous it is that we can release the weight of our bodies into the chairs, into the floor, and be held. It's almost as if we're being embraced by the world around us that accepts the weight of our bodies in this simple way. And again, just feeling the overall positioning of the body, noticing an overall felt sense of the shape of our bodies. We may not have been aware up to this point. Where are my hands? What are my hands making contact with? Is my back in contact with anything? Are my knees bent? Just kind of exploring the richness of the shape and positioning of the body. We may notice also there are some places in the body that are still feeling kind of tight. Sometimes stomach, shoulders. Whatever parts of the body we may notice. I just turn my attention lightly to that area of any remaining tightness that isn't necessary for my positioning. We can readjust a little bit. And perhaps we can invite a little more ease to balance with that alertness in the body. And as we settle into the body in this way, we begin to notice the felt sense of the body breathing. Again, this is not a new experience. We've been breathing since the moment we were born. Being alive is defined by breathing. And yet now, with some sense of awe and wonder, bring a light attention to where and how it is we feel this experience of breathing. Where does the air enter our bodies? Noticing perhaps the air coming in through the nostrils or the mouth, and the air leaving the body in that same way. So, noting the incoming breath and the breath leaving the body, happening thousands and thousands of times a day. And yet now we're making an intentional practice out of noting this process. And for many of us, the nose or the mouth may not be the primary place where we can become readily aware of the experience of the breath. So try noting also if you can sense a lifting and a settling in the chest, the area of the shoulders. It can be helpful to take a slightly deeper breath, not extreme, but just slightly, just to make that sensation a little bit more evident, that lift in the chest and shoulders. And at the same time, dropping our attention slightly, we may notice that the rib cage expands and contracts. The circle of the ribs softly opens and settles back down. Amazing construction in the body. The bones of the ribs strong enough to help protect those inner organs, and yet set up in a way that allows this movement as the air is pumped in and out through the area where the lungs are actually located. Coming in through the nose or mouth, down the chest, and then into this central area of the process of breathing. And as we note any experiences in that area of the rib cage, we can notice also that the belly moves. Part of that expansion, that pumping process, takes place in the area of the belly. Just allowing the breath to soften, the belly to soften. We can feel that ebb and flow in the belly. And as our attention settles a little bit, we might also notice there's a tendency to focus on the front part of the body, the front of the ribs, the front of the chest, the nose, the mouth, as our attention begins to settle, we can also realize, oh, the movement and sensation of breathing also takes place in the sides and the back of the body. The shoulder blades are moving. The lower part of the back may be making stronger contact and then softer contact with whatever we may be sitting against. The sides of the body lift and settle, and in that way, make contact with the inside of the arms. We might notice that the arms are actually moving. So as we bring our attention to this process of the breathing, we can begin to feel how in many senses our whole body is involved in breathing. And the rhythm is expressed in the in-breath, a pause, the out-breath, and a pause. See if you can settle your attention now to note these stages. In, slight pause, release, slight pause. It's subtle, but it helps to tone, to strengthen our attention, to dial into these details. And of course, our attention will wander, has wandered many times as I've spoken. That's not bad. That's not something to criticize ourselves about. It's the natural way we're wired to operate. It's also the opportunity to just begin again. To remind ourselves, I have a choice here about my attention. Celebrate, I'm aware of a wandering mind, thinking about what's for lunch or whatever. And then just come back to the felt experience of the body breathing. And in a sense, that coming back is part of what builds the muscle of mindfulness. It's like lifting weights. A little bit of resistance is part of what helps us gain the strength. And now, slowly, gently, if your eyes have been closed, let them open. You might stretch your body a little bit. Exhale a big breath. Can also be natural to get restless or to get sleepy when we do that. So if you got kind of sleepy, you can just wiggle a little bit. Completely natural. I'm doing an online retreat now. I've been doing meditation, mindfulness meditation like this for 40 plus years. I fell asleep in a meditation the other morning. It just happens. So, That's a taste of a, quote, formal mindfulness of breath and body practice. Why begin with the breath and body? Because we're wired in a brain sense for the breath to reflect something about our calm or agitation. When something kind of agitating is going on, we breathe fast. We take a deep breath and sigh to relax ourselves. Those are things we just are naturally doing with the breath that are part of why these mindfulness practices in long-standing contemplative traditions and in current kind of everyday practices and practices like mindfulness-based stress reduction, they begin with this sense of the awareness of the breath and the body. Take your hands now and put them in front of you and tighten up your fists. Just make them as tight as you can and then relax them. And you might have noticed if you were watching closely, when I did that, other parts of my body tensed up too and then relaxed. So the body also is a reflection of a whole system that can tighten up and relax. And we can simply stop and pay attention, as we did in the kind of the setting up of the breath meditation and the body scan. Pay attention to, where is there any tightness in my body? Breathe into that area or just turn attention to it and let it relax. But the breath and the body are tremendous bellwethers and points of leverage, in a sense, to help us settle. I recently learned, we won't do it, but it was really kind of funny to watch on the screen as the teacher demonstrated. He called it a practice of calm, the acronym CALM. First, you tightened everything up in your chest and then relaxed it. And then you tightened everything up in your arms and relaxed it. And then your legs. And then the funniest part was you tightened up everything around your mouth and relaxed it. And he said, if you're feeling anxious, doing that whole series, if you're someplace where you can do it by yourself, or just the hands, can remind us the body calming and relaxing can have a stabilizing effect on our whole sense of being. So doing a short kind of breath practice, a body scan, is a formal mindfulness practice that we don't wait till we're feeling bad to do, but when we've done it regularly, it becomes available as a skillful tool. And I want to say that this doesn't have to be done in the kind of formal and somewhat more extended way that I just led us through, nor do you have to have someone else leading you. There are wonderful informal practices that can be built into everyday life. One of them for me is that I walk with awareness of what's going on around me and the feel in my body. If we were doing this as a day-long program and had some other capacities, we would try that out now. But it's a real a two for one, in that a short walk, very simple, even just indoors, or preferably, if possible, outdoors, that physical activity is helpful with anxiety and depression. And doing so with an extra attention to the sounds, the feel of our feet landing. In my neighborhood now, some of my best buddies are the birds and the squirrels who accompany me on my walks. I've watched the changing of the trees. We can focus our attention in that way, and it becomes a mindfulness practice. At the same time, the gentle movement of the body is also helping with any mental challenges. So, if we can get outside, is being in nature. And so, again, a simple walk around the garden, walk up and down on the patio can have multiple benefits of that mindfulness practice, a little physical activity, and the scale and beauty of nature kind of giving us a different perspective. So a walking practice can be an everyday practice. So can eating. If we were set up a little differently, I'd have been handing out raisins, are the classic. I'd have been handing out raisins and guiding you through looking at the raisin, seeing the wrinkles, the colors, feeling the texture, thinking about where it came from, the complex travels it took for that raisin to be there in my fingers, sensing my anticipation and my urge to bite in, and when will this lady let me? And then taking a first bite and letting it sit in the mouth, chewing, the flavors being released, all of that, doing that in that exaggeratedly slow way becomes a wonderful mindfulness practice. Now, I don't do my dinners that way. I'd have starved to death if I did, and I don't have that willpower. But I will take a portion of a meal every day, and I'll stop and I'll look at it, the colors, the shapes, the textures. I'll feel my urge to jump in. I'll think about how it got there. It's funny that I would say that now because I just heard the Staff of Life delivery guy bring in my box of groceries downstairs. All of that, and then I'll take a bite and I'll go slowly and really taste and feel the textures. So I'm just suggesting that things as simple as a short walk, eating, our daily activities like doing the dishes, brushing our teeth, just set an intention to take a portion of that activity and do it with attention. The intention to pay extra attention. Attention with intention is mindfulness. I call it AIM. So use AIM in our everyday activities. And we've got some practice points built right into our regular lives. It can be helpful to create cues for yourself. I'm looking over here. I've got something a friend made for me. It says yes and has a heart. I leave it in a prominent place and it reminds me to stop and say yes to my experience. I also remember when I was still working and my job as county director for mental health could be kind of stressful sometimes. I had an informal meditation cue for practice that every time I touched a doorknob, I would take a mindful breath. Not so slow and goofy that everybody said, oh, there's that woo-woo director again. But the touch of the doorknob reminded me I'm making a transition. Breathe and feel that transition. So we can create our own cues of some sort that help us to remember to build in that aim, attention with intention equaling mindfulness. You might make yourself a little card that says aim, whatever works for you. I'm also going to suggest another informal acronym that for many people has been helpful, particularly in stressful situations. And that's what I call STOP. We all know what a stop sign looks like. You can just, in certain situations where you can feel yourself getting agitated, reactive, if you're beginning to train your attention, you might notice that in your body and can think about that stop sign. The acronym is STOP, take a breath, observe, and then proceed. Before the pandemic, I used to teach mindfulness down at Roundtree, the medium security facility down in Watsonville. And because reactivity was an issue for many of them, as was depression and anxiety, I taught them about stop. And in certain situations, when they sensed that agitation, to remember the stop sign. And one guy came in one day and said, Doc, I got to tell you, that stop sign saved my certain body part. And he told about being in the exercise yard and the guard coming over and grabbing him and saying, I'm going to drug test you. And he'd been clean for ages, and why me? And he started to have all that habitual reactivity and get in the guy's face. And he said, I remember that stop sign you told us about. I took a breath, I observed, and then I proceeded to say, okay, officer, whatever you need to do. Completely new form of behavior for him, and saved him from a great deal of negative consequences, I'm sure, and stunned the officer, I'm absolutely positive. And several people were in the yard with him, were in our class, and they said, yeah, dude, we saw that. It was so cool. You were our teacher. We bow to you. So not only did he not do something bad by stopping, observing, having that moment of pause, he garnered the admiration of others, and he could just feel that lift. So mindfulness can help us in those tough situations if we can remember the stop sign. Stephen, let me ask you, how are we doing on time?
We're doing well. We're just at a little past the bottom of 11:30, so you're doing well.
Keep going?
Yeah, you can keep going. Let's try and wrap up by at least a quarter till so we can have time for Q&A.
Great.
Comments.
There's one informal practice that I'd like us to try doing together because it's particularly relevant to depression and anxiety. Depression and anxiety, and I've not talked a lot about them. I'm not getting into my geeky Dr. Leslie mode to talk about them as how they're diagnosed and so on and so forth. I'm presuming most of us have some felt experience with some of that kind of condition. Someone's asking to go over AIM again.
Glad you saw that.
Attention with intention equals mindfulness. So if we're feeling, for example, down on ourselves, oh, here I go messing up again or whatever, and I start to get kind of depressed about what a mess I am, AIM would have me notice the body sensations with the intention to be kind to myself. And that can be caught in another acronym that I call SAL, my gal Sal, SAL. Soften, allow, love. And we're going to try that together, partly because just as the guy in the exercise yard said, the stop sign saved his butt, that soften, allow, love has saved me from winding into some pretty low moods and anxiety a few times. So again, just taking a sitting posture, that feels comfortable and relaxed, but also has some degree of alertness. And if it's comfortable for you, closing the eyes or at least softening the gaze. Just noticing the state of the body, where we're feeling the breath most easily. The breath coming in, pause, and out again. Letting the body settle in. And as we arrive in that way, bringing to mind a moderate, not big deal, moderate, challenging experience that we may be going through now. Maybe some interaction with someone else or some physical distress or something we've got to do that we're not sure we can handle. But again, we're not picking 10 on a 10-point scale. We're picking a 2 or a 3. I got to finish preparing my class for tonight. I should have done that already. I can feel some of that tightness. And with bringing to mind that kind of situation, soften the body that probably has tended to tighten up. As soon as I said that about tonight, I could feel my shoulders hunching. With that attention and intention, just soften wherever we might have tightened the body. And allow the feeling. Don't try to fix it. Don't try to push it away or distract yourself. Oh, a little anxious about tonight's teaching. Feeling it in the chest. Some tightness. Just allowing the emotional experience, softening the body, allowing the emotional experience, and then bringing an attitude of love to what we've allowed or accepted. We might do that in part by putting our hands over our heart, something we do as a gesture of kindness to ourselves. We might just imagine, if I were my own best friend, how would I be feeling about this difficulty? What would I be saying? And offering that love, that support, that caring to ourselves. Oh, Leslie, it's hard doing 2 teachings in one day and a retreat. I understand you're feeling a little anxious, maybe a little overwhelmed. It's hard. I'm here with you. Whatever it is that works for you to express caring and love for ourselves in the midst of difficulty. And just breathing in that caring. Just acknowledging this is part of being human. I'm not alone in having these feelings. I can direct that caring not only to other people, but to myself. Soften, allow, love. And taking a couple of deeper breaths. And if our eyes were closed, opening our eyes. And focusing on knowing others in this group. There are 35 or 40 of us, have all had similar experiences. They feel it in their bodies. It becomes a thought narrative. And once that narrative gets going, it can be hard. And that's why softening, allowing, and loving can turn that inner narrative around in a more positive direction. We have that choice. We can't fix the outer conditions. I still have 2 teaching gigs and a retreat going on today. But I can change, I can choose how I treat myself in the middle of that. And with a minute or so left, I want to end with a poem that I think captures some of this really beautifully, that I find poetry often says some of what I want to say way better than I can say it. It's by the mindfulness and yoga teacher, Dana Faulds, Danna Faulds, Dana Faulds. And it's called Walk Slowly. It only takes a reminder to breathe, a moment to be still. And just like that, something in me settles, softens, makes space for imperfection. The harsh voice of judgment drops to a whisper. And I remember again, life isn't a relay race. We will all cross the finish line. That waking up to life is what we were born for. As many times as I forget, catch myself charging forward without even knowing where I'm going, that many times I can make the choice to stop, to breathe and be, and walk slowly into the mystery. I can make the choice to stop, to breathe and be, and walk slowly into the mystery. And that's what I hope mindfulness can help us to do, that reminder to breathe, be still, and let ourselves settle and soften. Whew, thank you all.
Amazing, Leslie. Thank you so much. We have a question here real quick, if we can move into Q&A real quickly. Someone asked a great question. It was on my list to ask as well. So what are your tips on how to encourage or introduce mindfulness practice to an elder or a couple of older adults who are resistant to the idea of it?
I think it in part depends on the individual people and what you know about them, but you find an entry point that is consistent with things that they already enjoy doing. So maybe the entry point is walking. And you just say, what do you feel when you're walking? What do you see around you? Let's go walk together. whoa, stop, look at those squirrels, aren't they amazing? And you begin without calling it anything, just a kind of slowed down, more attentive way of doing an activity that people already like. At Dominican Oaks, sometimes I would use um, photographs of some sort and ask people what they felt when they looked at the photograph. So I'd bring in pictures of puppy dogs or kittens, or I'd bring in pictures of my grandkids. Who doesn't like showing off their grandkids? And we'd look at them together and I'd say, tell me what you feel in your body when you're looking at this little puppy. And it would accomplish some of the same things without having to call it anything and feel quite so woo-woo. I've also done that with listening to music. Had a group at Dominican Oaks that loved music. And I literally brought in a friend who played the piano. And I said, we're going to listen to Tanya play and then tell her what kind of experience we had listening to her music. So Tanya did her Beethoven or whatever, and then people told her about it. Well, they were practicing mindfulness. We just weren't calling it that. And so I think tuning into what's natural for people and doing it without a lot of fancy labels or a lot of assumption that it's got to be a particular way. My mother was one of those people who just rolled her eyes at this woo-woo stuff that I was doing. And yet I can remember toward the end of her life, her asking me to do a couple of those things because she remembered the informal ways that I had brought things into her life. And one of the ones she remembered was breathing, which was kind of challenged toward the end of her life. So
Beautiful. I love that. Introducing without them knowing that you're introducing it. That's,
not to be sneaky, but just to find natural, what's natural. And again, as with aim, attention with intention, the intention isn't to sneak in my way of doing things. The intention is love.
Indeed. I will just share with you, Leslie. You speak my language when you're talking about mindfulness. I think I've become more in contact with my need for some sort of daily practice to just recenter. Especially during the pandemic.
Oh.
And I'm finding I'm reacting less and appreciating more.
Ooh, yeah.
Not always, but it's a practice, not perfection, right? So
absolutely,
I can encourage folks in the audience today to do anything. Just give yourself permission to take a moment. You had opportunity today to sit there, and I hope you were able to shift focus away from wherever you were, any distractions in your life, to bring yourself to the ability to just be in a moment of peace and calm. And I'm finding that I'm feeling better on a daily basis. Feeling less stressed or anxious, but those feelings still come. So thank you, Leslie, so much for the wonderful tips and techniques that we not only can use ourselves, but bring them to the older adults that are in our lives that may be experiencing increased anxiety, depression, and isolation during the COVID-19 pandemic.
I just will close by holding up this memento from my childhood. It's a compass. And what I would say was, when I was little, I was goofy about our camping trips and loved to go off trail by myself. And rather than worry a lot or tell me no, my parents got me this and taught me to use it so I could always find my way back. And at some point, 40 plus years ago, when I started mindfulness practice, I realized it's my compass.
I love that.
So, in a sense, consider that you're giving yourself a compass that will show you where true north is in your life. And that's what we need to know when we're feeling anxious and depressed and our sense of everything is all distorted. Where is true north? So I keep my compass right here by my sitting chair too.
Love that. Thank
Forgot
you.
that one. Thank you.
So again, Dr. Tremaine, appreciate you so much for your information, your presentation, the woo-woo-ness of it. I loved that. I smiled every time you said it. But this really transcends so much in our own personal experiences and those that we care about in our lives and our community. So again, thank you very much for being here today. Folks, if you have a moment, I did post the survey link in the chat bar there. If you can go over to that, just do a quick link so it's up on another browser so you can fill out that survey for us. Let us know what you appreciated about today, what you felt you could have maybe learned a little bit more about, or how we might be able to just improve future webinar experiences for you, topics, presenters you'd like to see with us today or in the future rather. And I just, again, thank everybody for being here, giving us a moment of your day today to allow the opportunity to maybe bring you a little bit of peace, and in so doing, bring your older adult in your life a little bit of peace, calm, and love and joy. So with that said, again, Leslie, you are amazing. I look forward to staying connected with you, and everybody that was here today. Really appreciate your time. We wish you a peaceful day. And in woo-woo words, namaste.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everybody. Thanks for being here.